admin first. Has everybody signed in this morning? I want to make sure you get on the email list, or at least we know you're here. Yes, okay. I'll start here and then just pass that around if you would. It's a great pleasure to have Tom French here this morning. Tom is a sales coach. I'm going to read a little bit of his bio, not too much, but just enough to give you a taste of his expertise and depth in this career. So, Tom is an ICF certified professional coach and neuro-linguistic programming master practitioner, NLP master practitioner. Uh-oh.
That's better.
You're going to read us like a book. He's a trainer and a coach. He is a sales consultant and coach with over 25 years experience. I think Tom's got some really great content to share with us this morning. I think you'll get a lot out of it. I think that is representative by the number of people that came this morning. We're all eagerly looking forward to your talk, Tom. Good morning and welcome to Tom French.
Thank you. Morning, everybody.
Morning.
Is it feeling better, like a little cooler?
Yeah.
Yes.
So if it goes too far, I don't know if Angelo's in here. No, he isn't, but, oh, there he is. So we'll keep you honest. Yeah. So excited to be here, happy to be here. What I'm going to do is just pass around my business card because I don't have a handout, and this way you'll just have a way to get in touch with me if you'd like to afterwards. And so I'm going to talk about, the title of my talk is 3 blunders that cause initial sales conversations to fizzle. So I do a lot of work with salespeople around taking advantage of sales opportunities. And one of the things I hear most often that's most frustrating when I say, what's your biggest challenge? It's getting that initial conversation started well and having it be successful. Because if it's not successful, then you don't get the second conversation or you don't get whatever follow-up you're looking for. So you're dead in the water, if you will. So that's what I'm going to talk about, a little bit about me, and then I'll elaborate a little bit more on what we're going to do. So in my coaching business, thank you for the great introduction, NLP is a set of communication techniques that I studied when he said neuro-linguistic programming and NLP. I'm also certified as a life coach. I started out my coaching business focused on life coaching, which is to say helping people get their lives working more effectively. But I've spent my career in sales, so I decided to focus on helping salespeople become more effective at their jobs. So that's what I do. I work with small business salespeople, owners, and sales leaders, helping them get more customers by getting rid of limitations and strengthening fundamental skills. So they increase their results and they feel better about what they're doing at work. So the fundamental skills is an important thing to highlight because, why? Because the fundamentals really are necessary. If you don't do the fundamentals well, and again, we're going to talk about an initial conversation. So let me just check and see who's in the room because the comments I'm going to make about an initial sales conversation were developed to help people who are in a selling role. And that initial conversation is about getting a customer, and they're getting paid for getting customers, so salespeople. It also applies to anybody that might be either talking to a customer or talking to anybody where you have something you want to communicate effectively, and you want that message to get across. And success might mean that they do something for you, they adopt your point of view, so anybody here that's not in a quote-unquote sales role, I think will still find good value in what I'm going to share with you. So, but let me just check. How many people here, let's do it this way, are in, kind of given my description, how many of you are in a sales role? Most everybody. And I've heard people say, we all sell.
Right.
Well, we do, but there are differences in roles and there are different highlights. The big difference that I want to highlight in these comments are the difference between a conversation you're having when you're in a professional role and a conversation you're having with a friend or a loved one. Because the skills I'm going to highlight are skills you have. You're professionals, you're more than just functioning adults. Functioning adult sounds like a underhanded kind of something or other. You know, you're highly skilled, you have the skills I'm going to talk about. The difference is that when you're talking to a friend or a loved one or a spouse or casually at work, the stakes aren't so high. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is listening. So if you don't listen effectively or at a high level of efficiency, nothing really bad is going to happen. In fact, if you have a good relationship with that person, they'll probably forgive you if you miss something that they're sharing with you that they want you to hear. But in a professional situation, the stakes are much higher. And the consequences, it's leveraged both up and down. If you do it well, you get where you want to go. And if you don't do it well, very often, I use the word fizzle. The sale stalls, you don't get that advance, you don't get the sale. So there are other things that are important than fundamentals, but the fundamentals, and there are three that I've highlighted, and I'll tell you where they come from. Let me just tell my iPad here to not turn off. So they come from hang on one second. I told it to not turn off, and then it reset itself.
It wasn't listening.
Sternly enough.
It wasn't listening. It thinks it knows better than I do. You know how computers do that? They think they know what we want?
Oh, yeah.
Frustrating. So I'm going to talk about three things. I'm going to talk about, in terms of listening, there are three skills, or three, I call them blunders and mistakes that I identify. I'll spend most of my time talking about listening, but I'll talk about the other two. And then there's an additional one I'm working on, which is messaging, which really comes before that initial conversation. It's like how you kind of get it started or get into it. What do you say to introduce yourself, or what's your message that you send out about who you are that's going to draw somebody to you and activate their interest in hearing about what you have to say. So that's messaging. So I'm going to talk about why listening is important, why it's important to understand this whole issue of listening, what it looks like, what happens when it's done effectively or not effectively, and some tips on how you can stay out of trouble when it comes to listening. Does that sound
I was
good?
just thinking of Billy Bob Thornton's comment on the Golden Globes. He said, I know I didn't get in trouble saying anything, so all I'm going to say is thank you.
Nice.
I know for a fact I could get in trouble saying anything.
Well, you know, I don't know where you're going with that, but one thing I could
Just popped
do
in my
with that
head.
is to say, you know, if you think you're going to get in trouble by talking, ask questions. And actually, the key to so the third thing I'm not going to talk about today, but I will send you guys a summary of my comments, and the summary will include questioning, which I won't have time to get to. But the three are: what gets you in trouble is not listening, not focusing on the customer. That's a big pitfall. Most people think selling is about me and communicating effectively how great I am. That's not what selling is really about. Selling is about identifying what a customer needs that you might help with, and then communicating effectively how you can provide that help. So listening, focusing on the customer, and asking questions. And asking questions is really the default. Selling in some ways is really simple. And the magic is in asking questions. So if you're not sure what to say, or you think if you start to talk you're going to get yourself in trouble, just ask a question. And there's some really simple questions you can ask anytime that will invite the person you're talking to share with you what's going on with them. So I'm not sure where you're going with
No,
that.
it
but-
just popped in my head, something you said.
Yeah. So where do these come from? People want to know, you know, did I just make these up? So there are three things I say about where they come from. They come from my career in selling. So I spent my career working for large international training companies, calling to a large extent on Fortune 500 companies, and to some extent smaller companies. But I sold sales training, I delivered sales training, and I did consulting around sales training. And one of the things that I saw consistently was, from very new salespeople to very experienced salespeople, these fundamentals are the things that most frequently tripped salespeople up. New salespeople don't appreciate how important they are. Experienced salespeople frequently think if they take shortcuts, they'll get there faster. So they ignore or overlook or don't pay attention to the fundamentals, even though they know how to do them. So the second thing is research findings. Sales is an area where there's a ton of research that's been done because companies don't get customers unless they have somebody out. Many companies have direct sales force or they have sales in some regard. They don't do that effectively, they don't have customers, and if they don't have customers, they don't have a business. So there's a real incentive to know what works. So there's a lot of research that's been done. And the research, either the very early research that was done by Huthwaite or the current research that's been done, highlights these fundamentals as critical. There are other things that need to happen. You know, the game is tougher now. It's much tougher. And there are other things that salespeople need to be effective at. And some people think the fundamentals aren't important anymore. These new things, like being an expert and adding insights, are most important. Not true. And the pendulum is swinging back. And there's an acknowledgement that these fundamentals, you have to do these well. If you don't do these well, then the other things don't matter. And if you think about it, it makes sense. People want to have customers before they're going to really consider doing business with you. They want to feel you understand what they care about, what's important to them, the problem they have, the opportunity they have, whatever it is that you might be offering to help them solve. First thing first, they want to know that you understand what that is and that you actually care about helping them. So the old days of just making a sale for the purposes of making a sale doesn't really work so much anymore because people are more savvy and they've got good antennae and they can tell if you're really interested. So the third thing that place this comes from in terms of these themes is my own work coaching. And I find frequently in the coaching work that I do, these are the things that trip salespeople up. And on the other side, no matter how good they are, if they get better at them, there's a lot of leverage. It impacts results. So if you listen better, you get a more specific understanding of what the customer needs, and then when you make your offer or you invite them to do business with you, if when you communicate that, you do it in a way that ties directly into what they've told you is important to them, it's more powerful. And it's more likely to produce a positive result, meaning they'll invite you to help them or they'll accept your invitation to have them become a customer. So questions along the way are loud and welcome. So let me ask you a question. So listening. Is listening difficult? Especially when you're in a professional situation.
Yes.
I see some nods.
Yes.
So what makes listening difficult? And just hold that thought before you answer it. What I want to do is talk about, well, if you think about listening, when you're sitting and talking with somebody, one of the things that can make listening difficult is stuff on the outside. Right? A fire engine going by, a conversation in the next table, or shouting in the next room. Something on the outside is distracting and makes it difficult to listen effectively. I'm not talking about that. That happens. It's stuff that is in our head that happens that makes it difficult to listen. So give me some examples.
Thinking about what you're going to say next.
Thinking about what you're going to say next. Might be top 3
Mm-hmm.
answers I get when I ask this question. What's another one? Anybody?
Things I have to do today.
Things I have to do today. Yeah, I'm not even thinking about the conversation. Or the date I have
Things I
tonight.
have to do.
Or what I'm going to do when I make this big sale with the money I get.
Oh.
Right? That too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So and there's a good reason that we have a tendency to do this. So, as a mentor of mine said one time, you know, when it comes to this, it's not your fault that, you know, you sometimes fall into this pitfall of, you know, it's not that you stop listening, it's your listening efficiency drops. So the reason I wanted to highlight was there's a big difference between how fast somebody can talk and how fast we can hear, if you will. So typically people speak at about 150 words a minute, and we can hear at up to 900 words a minute. So there's lots of time to think while they're talking. And you probably don't, as you're thinking about what you're going to say next, you don't have an experience that your listening efficiency has dropped, but it has. And Richard Nichols, who's with the International Listening Association, says most people listen at 25% efficiency. So again, our context here is you're having a conversation with somebody else in a professional situation that's important, and you want the outcome of that conversation to be positive, whatever that is for you. They agree to a next step, they agree to do what you've asked them to do. And if you're listening at 25% efficiency, you're missing a lot, aren't you? And my experience with coaching with salespeople, when a sales fizzles or when they don't get the business, very, 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 very often, it's because they missed something. And what they missed was an opportunity to connect. They missed something that that customer was concerned about that they could have picked up on, and they could have used that to engage with the customer and then create that strong connection between what the customer wants to do and how they can help. It's not always true, but it's frequently true. So what do we do about that? If we're listening at 25% efficiency, and that causes us to miss what's there, you know, that we can pick up on, that then can build our credibility and build the customer's trust that we understand them and activate, if you will, their interest in doing business with us. You know, that's what we want to do in that initial conversation. And the key to that is understanding the customer and having them know we understand. So it's not just understanding, it's know we understand. If you ask salespeople, do you understand your customer's needs? 85% will say, yeah, I understand my customer's needs. If you ask the customers of those salespeople, same question, do your salespeople understand your needs? What do you think they say?
No.
How many, what's the percentage? 80% of salespeople say, yes, I understand my customer's needs.
10%.
10%. What's 20? Yeah, it's about 20. It's a very small number. One reason for that, I think, there are multiple reasons possibly. One reason is that we have a tendency as salespeople, we're so eager to share what we have to offer, and we're so proud of it. And very often salespeople, companies, if you work for a company, maybe even if you work for yourself, you've worked so hard to articulate your message and get yourself, you know, amped up for talking to somebody. First opportunity you get to unload how great you are, you do it. So they identify a need, yes, it's a real need, and they then move to offering whatever it is they have to offer. And for the customer's point of view, yeah, you got this, but there's a lot more going on with me that I'd actually like to have you understand. And so from my point of view, not so much. You know, you didn't really, as the customer. So that might be one reason that that happens. So I think, did you say thinking ahead? You know, when I ask this in workshops, they're very common. You know, what are the barriers to listening? One of the most common is thinking about what I'm going to say next. And part of what's underneath that is that I know where the customer's going. So I know what they're going to say next, so I don't really have to pay attention so much because, you know, I know what the needs are. I've had this conversation before. So I start to think. And the trap is we don't really know what the customer's going to say next. So we're going to do a quick exercise to illustrate that. So I'm going to ask you 4 questions. This is audience participation. Are you guys up for this?
Sure.
Okay. I'm going to need a little more participation than that, but we'll see how it goes. So the question is, and I have to make sure I say this right here. So how do you spell spot? Everybody say it out loud.
Spot.
Spot.
No, how do you spell it?
S-P-O-T.
That was pretty good, but you can do better.
IT.
Better? Let's try one more time. How do you spell spot?
S-P-O-T.
S-P-O-C-K.
No, spot. Like, you know, spot on the shirt.
See, that's a whole nother issue for me, is I'm hard of hearing.
Are you?
Yes,
Okay.
and
Well,
so-
we'll get everybody to say it
That's-
louder. We're gonna say it all together and louder. How do you spell spot?
S-P-O-T.
And what do you do at a green light?
Stop.
What?
G-O.
Stop.
Stop?
Oh, you got it, yeah.
And again.
You got me.
Wait a second.
Very good, very good.
That's funny.
Isn't that a good
You
one?
know my fault.
I didn't know it was a trick.
Works every time.
I've done that with my LD kids and parents.
So what happened there? Why did you say stop? You're smiling. Did
Oh,
you
I
s-
did, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Why did you say stop?
It's like a cognitive, like, just, oh, that's the word, so.
It's alliteration.
Association, Yeah.
And I did this,
Uh-huh.
which if you look at what NLP says about communication, I'm just gonna touch on this, but it's really interesting. Rabin did this research, and you'll hear this research incorrectly quoted, actually. His research was about when there's a mixed message. There's visual, there's auditory, and there's tone of voice, and there's non-visual. So, or there's, let me make sure I say it. Words, tone of voice, and visual. So when there's a mixed message, we tend to value more what we see than what we hear. That's part of the reason that worked, because I did this very emphatically, and when you're getting a mixed message, we tend to put more value on what we see. So if somebody says, you know, I really want to see you again, I don't want to go out with you, whatever your example is. So that's a great example that illustrates, you know, how they're fundamental human things that can get us into trouble. So where does that take us? So if you think about selling, what selling is or what listening is, I already talked a little bit about what selling is. I could ask you, what is your, when you think of a salesperson or when you think of selling, what do you think? What do you think, what words come to mind?
Used car salesman.
Used car salesman. And what about a used, what's he likely to do?
Sleazy.
Sleazy.
Pushy.
Yeah. Pushy. Anybody else?
Try to trick you and get the better of you.
Uh-huh. Sell you something you don't really need?
Yeah.
Manipulate you? Yeah. So there's a it's amazing to me how common it is and how well kind of, you know, how people really have a belief about salespeople that they are this way. And if you're a salesperson, can you see how that kind of gets you in trouble? You know, you're not being a good person. You're not really helping people. You're doing this other thing we talked about. So the reality is, and part of that is that, you know, sales is about talking, you know, having a silver tongue. I'll say it louder again, okay? Maybe you'll get it this time. You know, salespeople have a tendency, a lot of salespeople, and I find this in training programs over and over again, it's just amazing. They think that being effective in selling is communicating effectively, and if the customer doesn't get it, you repeat it more loudly, maybe elaborate more. And that's not what really makes selling work. It's the things I've already started to talk about. So if you look selling, or you look, so listening, we're actually here talking about listening. Listening is probably the fundamental. When you're listening effectively, then you get the understanding of the customer. And if you look at the research, people buy from people they feel understand their needs and who they trust. And trust actually comes out of that, you know, out of that understanding. The customer wants to feel you understand their needs or their problem before they're going to really start to consider actively having you provide them whatever it is you're selling. So that understanding is critical. So if you look, and listening, you know, listening is really the first thing there. So if you look listening up in the dictionary, Webster says, listening means paying attention to someone in order to hear what they say. So it's pretty straightforward. There are pitfalls, but it's really powerful when it's done well. So I'll give you two quick examples here. One when it's done well, and one when it isn't done so well. So my old boss, Eve, comes back to the office Friday afternoon, and she's very upset because the customer she met with expected the proposal to be on her desk, his desk actually, on Monday morning. And Eve was going to Long Island, and she was going to be away the whole weekend, and the only time she had to write the proposal was coming back on the train from Long Island to New York City on Sunday night. So she does it, she writes the proposal, she sends the proposal out Monday morning. Very soon after she sends out the email, the reply comes back, great proposal, let's get started. Interesting, nice. So, being the consummate professional she is, Eve picks up the phone, says, hi Jack, thanks. Really look forward to working with you. Can you tell me why you decided to work with us? Should always ask, always. He says, that was a great proposal. You used my words. You used my words. And in many ways, that's really what you're striving for in that initial conversation. So using, you want to play back, so when you've listened, you want to demonstrate that you've listened, and you do that by summarizing. And I'll talk more about that in a second. And in summarizing, the closer you can get to what the customer said, the better. One of the other pitfalls I find is salespeople tend to either elaborate or they kind of tilt it, So it sets them up better to make their pitch. And if you tilt it too far, it's not what they said. So, so the other example, I was calling on a big tobacco company. Big opportunity for me. Biggest I'd had up until that time. And we get 3/4 of the way through the conversation. The client's name was Tom. And I said, Tom, why don't I just take a second to play back what I've heard you say here, because I know this is really important to you. So I did my little summary, and he said, stop. That is spot on. That's excellent. As a matter of fact, your competitor was in here last week, and I met with her 2 times, and each time I had to repeat what I said, and she just didn't get it. So I'm done with her, and you get the business. Pretty cool. It was a very powerful illustration to me about the importance of those 2 things. Because listening isn't enough. You have to then be able to play it back and show that you've listened. And you can't just replay a tape of the whole conversation. You have to boil it down to the key points. That's what summarizing means. In that case, I actually had to write a proposal, and I had to meet with the executives, and I didn't have the business, but as far as he was concerned, I did. So it's very powerful when you do that, because it was really clear to me. It was really important to him. He thought he had a unique situation. As a seller, I might go, I've heard this before. It's not so unique, Tom. That doesn't help me, because he wants to know that I get what is important to him. Does that make sense? Okay. So what happens if you don't listen well? Well, we just gave an example of that. And I want to talk a little bit about this in and out listening. I think I already mentioned Ralph Nichols, who says we listen at 25% efficiency. So what happens is that somebody says something that prompts us in some way to start thinking about what they said, or to think about what we're going to have for lunch, or to think about something else. And Carl Rogers, who's a very famous psychologist. Anybody know who Carl Rogers is? He wrote an article that was published in the Harvard Business Review about listening, and what he said was the biggest, he was a psychologist, so he was about helping people who weren't well get better, if you will. And he said the biggest barrier, the biggest cause of difficulty is poor communication, or barriers to communication. And the biggest barrier to communication is ineffective listening. Or he said it was listening to evaluate. And he said that's the thing. So just as people, the thing that gets in our way of having relationships, take that conversation with the customer where we're trying to make that connection, and just think about as people, he said the biggest barrier is we listen to evaluate. And what that does is interrupt our listening, because we're not really listening. He said that's the barrier, the gateway to effective listening is listening to understand. And in the 70s, active listening became very popular, and active listening was about listening to understand. And that's really what I'm talking about you're doing with customers. So that the dynamics here that's going on interpersonally when you meet with a customer, it's a human dynamic. It's not just about selling. It's not just about theory about selling. It really underlies the process of communication. So what are 2 things you can do, or you can look for, to be able to tell whether or not you're listening, and to check yourself and to practice listening? Carl Rogers said the biggest test of whether or not listening, listening to understand is really going on, and this is what he did with his patients, and this is what I'm suggesting you do with customers. I just looked up this research yesterday, or earlier this week. I'll be happy to send it to you if you're inclined. But what he had his patients do was, before you speak, you summarize what the other person has said. And you have to do it to their satisfaction. So that's exactly what I'm going to say you do with customers. And if you do that, it's actually much harder to do than it sounds. First of all, especially, he's working with people who have problems communicating. There's a big issue there. So it's difficult. You're working with a customer. The biggest thing with salespeople and customers is that customers aren't used to having salespeople really be interested, or ask questions and then play back and show that they really understand. So part of where I'm going with this is it really differentiates you. So just a couple more points here. So how to do it well, the really simple thing is encouraging. So what is encouraging? Encouraging is nodding your head, making eye contact, smiling, leaning forward, acting like you're interested and listening. And if you do that, it's easier to actually listen. So it's very simple, but it works. And it makes the customer feel like you are interested and you're actually listening.
And
Is
if
it? Yes, yes,
If
yes.
you're on the phone,
If you're on the phone,
what kind of, what would that look like?
good question. What would you say?
Well, summarizing and
Uh-huh.
repeating what they said,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
saying yes, letting them know you're listening, saying,
Uh-huh.
I understand that.
Yep.
I've had sales training where you talk about phone skills, having a mirror in front of you, so that you are
Talking
seeing
to
yourself smiling, you can get your own visual cues. And I
That's
think
great.
for myself, speaking of technology, just putting the technology away
Oh,
when
yeah.
I'm in front of, it's easy, I'm a realtor, so it's easy to have my cell phone sitting here because I might get a call, and what I really need to do is to leave it at my desk, walk
Yeah.
into the conference room and walk away from it. So
Yeah.
that's something that I need to take note of for myself.
I think that's really good.
Yeah, put that phone away.
Yeah. And if you're on the phone with a customer and they're checking their Outlook while they're talking to you, if you hear the keys, you can hear the keys.
Yeah.
But if you can't hear the keys, can you still tell?
Sure you can.
You don't have 100% of their attention.
Absolutely.
That's why this is so powerful, because can your customers tell when you're thinking about what you're going to do afterwards?
Absolutely.
They're like you, they're sophisticated interpersonally, so they don't show it, right? But they can tell, just like you can tell. Sorry.
Sorry, I have no sense of hearing direction.
Yeah.
Tom, can I say one thing?
Yes, please.
I was reading some research, and another skill that's, instead of just showing that you're listening,
Yeah.
is kind of mimicking what they're doing.
Yes.
So if they're crossing their leg a certain way, cross your leg the same way,
Yes.
and that creates a bond.
Yeah, it's rapport.
Without going overboard, but.
Yeah. Well, and it's not manipulative. A lot of this and NLP teaches, it's building rapport, it's called matching and mirroring. So if somebody speaks fast,
Yeah.
within your natural range, you pick up your pace a little bit so it's similar to theirs. If they speak slowly, natural pace is a little faster, you just slow down. Because people like people who are like them. That's what that is about. And it's not manipulation. You do it all the time anyway. It's just in a professional situation, you're cultivating more astute awareness about these things that either help communication or inhibit communication. So that's a great example. So the other thing that I've started to do is put people's picture. I go to LinkedIn and I copy their picture. So if I'm calling Tim, when I talk to Tim, I'm looking at his picture. Try it. It really works. It just makes it feel easier to connect with him because I'm looking at him. And he's got a good picture. A lot of people don't have pictures on LinkedIn.
Pictures all over the place.
It is. That's because you're such an important guy. So if you don't have a picture on LinkedIn, get one on there. And if you're talking to somebody who's important, that's another thing I've started to do that I think really helps. So that's a bit of a sidebar. So summarizing, I just want to make a couple points about summarizing. So summarizing is not, replaying the whole conversation on tape. It's highlighting the things, again, the purpose of the conversation is to find out what they need that then you can hook up to, right? What bad experiences they've had with dental offices that they want to avoid, for example. Great question to ask. Maybe, I don't know. So you want to play back the salient points, the key points. And the thing is to do it in bullets. Especially if you're extroverted and talking comes easily to you. You know, be very concise. The way I put it is talk in bullets, not sentences or paragraphs or, you know, chapters or stories. Just very concise bullets, and then check. Say, did I get that right? So you might say, it's been great talking to you, Bob. Let me just pay back what I heard you say about what you're concerned about. So your sales results are down, and you're saying your salespeople are not making enough calls. They also don't have enough prospects, and there are too many decisions that don't go anywhere. You call them no decisions. Is that right? So you just play back what you heard, and he might say, well, actually, it's not that they don't have enough prospects, it's that marketing isn't giving us enough leads. Okay, great. Then I might clarify that. What it does is make them feel, okay, now we can talk about how you can help because you understand what's important to me. The way to practice it, I think the hardest way to do it is at the end of a conversation, if you're not used to doing it. So do it in an email. Let me follow up this conversation with an email just summarizing what you shared with me before we get together next week. If you're having another conversation, some of you might be in a situation where there isn't another conversation coming, and then you still want to practice that. And if you practice it in the conversation and you don't feel like you did it quite right, when you get in the car, do it again. Because you just get better at it. You get more comfortable playing back to somebody what they've said to you. Now you don't want to parrot, because if you parrot, like that example I gave earlier, the client said you use my words, I've had that happen. I just said that. You don't want that reaction. Now you want to say, yeah, that's it. So summarize. Practice summarizing at the end of a conversation, or if you have a second meeting, at the beginning of the meeting, start out by saying, let me just play back what I heard from you last time that's most important to you. Okay, so that's pretty much it. If you do this and you practice this, two things happen. You make a positive impression because people want to be understood, so you're giving them what they want. Even if they say to you, tell me, tell me all about what you can give me and tell me what the cost is. And I work with salespeople around, how to get around that. Because they don't think you're interested. They're not used to having salespeople really be interested. So you want to show that you are interested, and when you are, you make a positive impression, and that makes them more inclined to consider doing business with you. And you also differentiate yourself. If there are other people that they're talking to, you're going to be different. Because salespeople don't do it, don't listen well, and they especially don't summarize well. I was doing a major presentation just a while ago, big competitive presentation or sales situation. I started out by summarizing what they had told me, and at the end they said, wait a minute, stop, okay? Because nobody has tried to do that. You're the first salesperson that's come in here and tried to show us they understand what's important to us. So why salespeople don't do it, I don't know, but they don't. So if you do it, you make a positive impression and you'll stand out. So I think that's it for my comments. Oh, two things. If you'd like a summary of the talk here, including questions, which I didn't have time to do, give me your business card and I'll send it to you. And also, what I like to do is offer a free hour of coaching for anybody that would be interested in pursuing these topics, because this has really been about me talking, and what I like to do is find out about you and what you're working on. So anybody that would be interested in a free hour of coaching work, just let me know. And if you'd like a copy, PDF summary of this talk, including questions, just give me your business card and I'll send it to you.
Excellent.
In summary,